2023 was a crazy year for Star Wars fans. We got a nice amount of shows like Ahsoka, Mandalorian Season 3, and Vision Season 2. However, we also got new content in the form of games. No, I'm not talking about Star Wars 1313. That shit is never coming out. I'm obviously talking about one of the biggest games of this year, Jedi Survivor, but more specifically, I like to dedicate this video to one of the most talked about Star Wars characters from the game itself, Cere Junda. Now, my opinions on her as a character have almost always been the same. Her character was done fabulously and had a great amount of impact on the Jedi Survivor story. However, when looking at her through the lens of power scaling, things start to get a lot more confusing. I'd like to dedicate this portion of the video to her fight with Vader, and add some lines of reasoning as to why we can't really give her the insane credit some people online are giving her. My first point of contention with this fight is the fact that throughout the majority of this altercation, Vader was fighting with only one hand. Why does this matter exactly? Well, it is very well known that whenever one person fights with a single hand or arm, they're not usually fighting with their highest possible power output, as you can only exert so much energy with only one arm being used. We actually see this exact idea playing out in the middle of the fight, whenever Vader decides to start swinging with both arms, as we see Cere being significantly pushed back from each blow that her saber manages to tank. What does this tell us exactly? Well, it tells us that this form of Vader at full power is able to push her back entirely, and she shouldn't really be comparable to Vader at this point. However, I understand that some people may still be confused and or want more evidence, and to that I say, I got you. Many Cere advocates claim that she was actually very close to killing Vader, hence they should be close to the same power level. Then they would proceed to insert a statement from the game that reads as follows: Cere nearly defeated Sith Lord Vader. Well, to that I say that statement is actually quite accurate. However, she only came close to beating him entirely through environmental factors, which I deem to be purely external and not much of a feat. During the latter end of their fight, Cere swiftly gains distance and proceeds to blitz Vader using a bookshelf that was set on fire through an explosion, and because of such, Vader similarly performs right afterwards. In fact, he's hardly able to keep up with her. Not because she's so powerful, but because the guy in a poorly designed robot suit literally had a burning bookshelf thrown at him. Now, I'd like to clarify that I don't think that Cere is the weakest of them all. In fact, one can argue that this fight goes to show how resistant she is physically. In Star Wars, the Force passively amps those who have a strong connection with it. This is usually done in combat. The amps that certain users get often goes unspecified though, and not often it gets brought up in many scaling discussions. However, I believe that as long as Vader is Force amped one way or another, it should still be something that we should take into consideration when examining her durability in this fight. Now, that begs the question, who can she actually beat? Well, in order to answer this, I'd first like to talk about her greatest attributes: her insane agility and the Force. In the Dark Temple comic line, we see her being able to blitz through blaster shots at close range, take down a whole group of security droids, and a few Trandoshans as a Padawan. Keep in mind, because all these feats were made as a Padawan, we should only expect her fighting capabilities to grow much further past this point. This inherent attribute should only be strengthened by the fact that in her final fight with Vader, she was not only able to dodge many of his initial one-handed strikes, but she's seemingly able to react to a few of his two-handed strikes as well. Note what I mentioned earlier, she's seemingly behind in terms of power. However, throughout most of the fight, she has a significant amount of agility and took a clear advantage of it. In terms of the Force, there are many crazy statements from Battle Scars which state her to be the most powerful Force user in the galaxy. As many would assume by now, I'm going to take this statement with a heavy grain of salt, and affirm that it is likely a hyperbole in reference to her impressive Force abilities. One example of such would be when she held Vader's blade back using the Force alone. It is also important to remember that this was a time when she was progressively becoming more connected to the Force, as stated in this databook. Because of these performances, in my most humble opinion, she should be above characters like the Grand Inquisitor, who got outdueled relatively quickly by an arguably weaker Vader back in the 2017 comics. Now, this scaling should not be that surprising considering the fact that in Fallen Order, when Vader first fought Cere, he was relatively quick to point out her potential as a perfect Inquisitor. In totality, she should be considered a mid-tier duelist in the grand scope of Star Wars, as this Vader who she was losing to does have some notable losses. However, that's a topic for another video. But what do you guys think? Do you believe that she should have beaten Vader given other circumstances, or do you think that the Grand Inquisitor is still stronger than her? Leave your comments down below. If you enjoyed this and want more videos like this one, make sure to leave a like and subscribe notifications on. With all that said, adios.